Hello, a very good afternoon, morning, evening to everybody, depending on what part of the world you are in right now. A very welcome to our webinar. Today, we are going to be focusing this webinar on ISO 31000, which is the risk management standard, and it is going to be all about that standard itself. The webinar is going to be headed by Mr. Swami, who's an expert in ISO related standards. And a quick few things before the webinar that if you've already been with us, you must already know that our webinar is usually for around 1 hour, in which 45 minutes is going to be all about the topic which we are going to talk today, and in the end 15 minutes we will have quick Q&A section. So if you can see on the left hand side of your screen, there's a Q&A box. So if you have any questions pertaining to today's webinar and related topic, you can post your questions in the Q&A box, and Mr. Swami would address those questions in the end 15 minutes. And also we'll be running a quick poll, and we'd love if everybody could participate and join in the poll. So yeah, I think that's a little bit brief, and now I'm going to be handing over to Mr. Swami. Thank you.
Thank you, Arwa. Very good afternoon and good morning and good evening, whichever part of the world you are. Now we are going to see about ISO 31000 2008-18 risk management standard. What is the practices that we need to have in order to have an effective and efficient risk management process in the organization? That all will be talked about today. We will be learning that in this due course of time. Our agenda for the day is to introduction about ourselves and some terminologies that we need to be aware of, and about ISO 31000, and what are all the risk management principles, what are all the risk management framework and the risk management process. Also some technical risk example we will like to look at. Now, about us here, we are Denver-based Colorado licensed CPA firm focusing on SSCE 18 SOC compliance reports, cloud data security, and privacy. We have an associated office in Mumbai, India. Our team carries extensive experience in the field, and we are listed in Cloud Security Alliance and PCAOB as auditors. We are also an ISO IEC accredited certification body for data security and privacy. We have specific experience in working with large and SMB clients. Only few entities worldwide can provide both SOC 2 and ISO certification under one brand. We are proud to be one among them. Our CEO, Mr. Ashwin Chaudhary, he has 20 years of experience in cybersecurity governance and risk compliance. He is a qualified CPA and MBA. He has a lot of global certifications on data security, cloud security, privacy areas. He is experienced in setting up several large organizations, cybersecurity architecture. He has architected a lot of organizations, and he also been providing a lot of sessions on the Untitled Chapter, Mumbai, as well as the recently concluded Congress session. He provided a lot of sessions on that, and he has got a lot of experience in data security and privacy areas. This is myself, Swaminathan. I am the audit delivery head at ASDR. I have 37 years of experience in IT industry, 10 plus years in cybersecurity governance and risk compliance. I'm a qualified MCA, also certified ISO 27000K lead auditor. I have extensive knowledge on cloud security, SOC 2 requirements. Also part of I also conducted a lot of audits on SOC 2 and ISO 27000K audits. And I was instrumental in getting organization-wide certifications for my organizations, and also monitored a lot of ISMS implementation. and audited ISMS and SOC requirements. Now, coming back to our topic of the day, ISO 31000. Before we jump on to that, we would like to understand some of the terminologies, important terminologies that we should be aware of. Number one, as we are aware that 31000 is for risk management process. A risk, what is risk? Basically, it is an effect of uncertainty in achieving our objective. The uncertainty can be positive, it can be a negative way. The uncertainty we need to manage because the entire world is full of uncertainties. We need to have some process and procedures in place to meet those uncertainties in order to achieve our organizational objectives. Risk management. Coordinate activities to direct and control an organization with regard to risk. As we said, that the control and the directions that is coming from the top management in order to meet the risk mitigation and other aspects need to be there. So the entire activities that you are planning to identify risks and mitigate them, control them, and continuously improve them are all going to be part of this risk management activities. Now, risk source. It is an element, can be one element or it can be combination of elements which can create, which has the potential to give rise to risk. Event, occurrence or change of a particular set of circumstances. It's an event. Any change that happens inside the organization or external to the organization, all that are considered events which may affect our achieving our objectives, need to be identified and addressed. Now, consequences is the impact or the outcome of an event affecting our objectives. Likelihood, chance of something happening. A likelihood, it can happen in today or it may happen in near future. It might have happened also. So considering all this, we need to come out with our risk management process. Now, when we talk about another important aspect of the terminology that we need to understand is the stakeholders. Who are all the stakeholders? Stakeholders are the people who are going to get affected or being affected by any change that happens in the environment of the organization. Yeah. Now, coming back to the standard, what is that standard? The main focus of this standard 31,020/18 is primarily on managing risks. What are all the different types of risks that we have? It can be operational risk, it can be a financial risk, it can be strategic risks of all that. Okay. Now, if you see the reputation, it could be consequences is nothing but outcomes of the effect that we may have that based on professional reputation. Some outcomes which are coming, which may positive, which may be negative. Negative, if it is negative, then we probably need to continuously monitor and then mitigate them and reduce them. And if it is positive, we should try to take advantage of it in order to advantage of it and try to implement them. Yeah. Now, there are certain things. One is professional reputation, another one is safety and societal outcomes, environmental outcomes, and economic performance outcomes. If you see risk management, if you consider, it is not a one-time activity. It is a continuous process. It should be an iterative process also. Again, which are all the organization need to have risk management in place? All organization needs to have this, irrespective of the size, the kind of types of organization, whatever they are, because organization is working in an environment which is uncertain. So any uncertainty which is coming up, which is going to affect in achieving the organization objectives, we need to monitor, mitigate, and address. So that is why all types of organizations and sizes, irrespective of anything, they have to have implement ISO 31000 2018 standard guidelines. They have to follow those guidelines. The guidelines basically, 31000 2018 is not a certifying standard, but it is only a guidelines which is given, like what are all the principles that each good risk managements need to have, and what are all the things that we need to consider while preparing our framework for risk management, and what are all the items that we need to take care when we prepare our risk management process. All these are being defined and given in our standard. About 31000 2018 is giving those things. Now, coming back to the next, we will be see what are all the principles. Principles are to be followed in order to have an effective and efficient risk management process. See, there are 8 principles as per ISO 31000 2018. If you look at it, these are given in the class number 4, which has 8 items. The first and foremost thing is that integration. What is the purpose of these principles is achieve value for the organization, and we have to create value, and also we need to protect the value. So the purpose of principles, following the principles in risk management, is primarily to achieve value creation and protection, and also it is going to improve the performance of the organization, and also it's going to encourage innovation and supports achievement of the organizational objectives. Everything is around the organization, achieving the organizational objectives. Anything that are going to affect in achieving the objectives need to be addressed, need to be mitigated, and need to be controlled. So now, the first and foremost part of the risk management principle is integration. What is integration? Integration is that it is going to be all activities that we do in an organization are need to be considered for risk management process. It is not that we identify only certain activities where we conduct risk management and risk assessment and things like that and leave it there. No, all activities need to be considered. This will enable us to achieve enterprise risk management system. Okay. Now, for anything to achieve, there has to be some structure in place, and also it should be comprehensive. The structure should be based on the organizational structure. We need to have roles and responsibilities defined, and also the structure should be adapted at all levels of the organization. It's not that only one team is available for doing the risk management. At each and every level of the organization, being a project, being a department, being at the, holistically, we need to look at that at each level, we have all the structure, the risk management structure implemented and followed. Now, is it okay? Is it necessary that we have to follow a standard process for every type of risk? No. We can have customized. It can customize it based on the internal and external context of the organization and the objectives that we want to achieve, and a size of the organization, and also the complexity of the organization. All these points we need to take into account while we customizing the risk management principles for our organization. Now, we need to include all stakeholders into the risk management process. It's not enough only one or two people involved in identifying the risk and providing the risk mitigation controls and things like that. It's all people who are there in the organization who are getting affected, being affected. They all need to be involved in the risk management process. As a principle, we need to include all of them, and also information should be available to them at all times, at appropriately. Appropriate and timely involvement of stakeholder also is important. Even now, nowadays, we call stakeholders as interested parties. Results in improved awareness and risk management means to say that there has to be a continuous training happening across the organization to include all the people in the risk management process. And each and every one of them must understand what is risk, how it is to be addressed, how it is to be analyzed. All that need to be taught to them over a period of time during the lifetime of the organization. Now, coming back to the other classes, dynamic. This is one of the important principles. Basically, the entire environment is dynamic in nature. So the risk management that we are deploying or implementing, it needs to enable that it should be able to anticipate and detect and acknowledge all the changes that is happening in the environment and address them in the risk management process and the controls that we implement. Then all the information which we should be covering, taking into account the history, the past, current, and future information. What are all the future possible threats that can come? What are all the possible vulnerabilities that can come? We need to address all of them into this our risk management process. So that is one of the important aspect, that information to risk management are based on historic, current, and future expectations. Need to consider the limitations that we have about the information. We may have some information today. That information may become obsolete over a period of time. So we need to have constant touch with the external world and also collect all information which will be used in order to bring up the risk management process. Now, human and cultural aspects going to play a very big role in implementing effective and efficient risk management process. Now, culture of the organization, if the culture of the organization is to accept risks, with what level of risk that organization can take and accept, all need to be identified and documented, and they need to be addressed in the risk management process. And also, the human people who are there at each and every level and the culture available in each and every level of the organization needs to be considered. Now, of all, is it enough we just implement the risk management and keep quiet? No, it is not enough. We have to have a continuous monitoring of the efficiency of the risk management process by collecting metrics and measurements related to the controls that we implement and ensure that they are continuously improved. So one of the important principle is continuous monitoring and continuous improvement aspects. These are all the 8 risk management principles that need to be followed or need to be considered while preparing the risk management framework and process. Now, going back to the next one, what we are planning to look at is we are going to look at the framework of the risk management process. Now, a framework is the framework which needs to be followed, and it's not a fixed framework. Framework can undergo changes based on changes that's happening, and also while preparing the framework, there has to be a commitment from the organization, from the top management. For any management system or any guidelines or any standard that we want to implement in the organization, it must have commitment from the leadership team, that they are the people who are going to drive that in across the organization. So now coming back to this risk management framework, which has been explained in class 5, has an important aspects, like it should be integrated. That means to say that it should be happening across all the organization, and there has to be a design process needs to be followed, and also we have to implement them and evaluate the implemented process and make improvement. As we all know that ISO works on plan, do, check, act. Whatever we are trying to do, we are doing the integration and design at the plan stage, and implementation is the do phase, evaluation is the check phase, and improvement is the act phase. So in that way, this entire framework need to be framed and addressed to all the stakeholders in the organization. Now, as I was telling, that for implementing any framework in an organization, we need to have leadership and commitment from the top management. So now we will see each and every aspect of this framework requirements in detail in the subsequent slides. Now, coming back to the point that 5.1 is a general thing which will be talking about that leadership and commitments needs to be there, customizing and implementing all components of the framework. See, it's not enough you set the framework and not implement all the components of the framework. If you're not going to do, if you're not going to implement all the components of the framework, then the effectiveness and the efficiency of the risk management process will not meet the organizational requirements. So what is important is that the leadership and commitment class, we need to ensure that the risk management framework need to be customized based on the changes that's happening in external or internal to the organization, and need to be implementing all components of the framework. Now, issuing a statement or policy that we are, as an organization, we are going to implement risk management policy, and all employees in the organization need to adhere to the risk management policy. Such directions should come from the top management, and top management people should be part of each and every aspect of the implementation, and they should able to provide their guidance in order to ensure that the risk management process is happening correctly. So they need to do an oversight activities also for those activities that are being done as part of the risk management. Now, entering that, ensuring that necessary resources are allocated. Who can allocate resources? Basically, risk management is not in silo. It is a continuous process, and there has to be people available for doing this activity continuously. So only management can decide whether we can have how much many amount of people we can put, and who are all can be there. And people who are going to be involved in this risk management process should be aware of the environment, organizational environment, as well as external environment. Like that, people they should have competence in identifying risks, doing risk assessment, risk analysis, continuous improvement, all that aspects. And also they have to assign authority and responsibility and accountability at appropriate levels within the organization. The people who are going to be deployed for implementing risk management system should be provided with sufficient authority and responsibility, and they are accountable for all the happenings in the risk management process. Now, Coming back to the 5.3 class, which is talking about integration, relies on an understanding of the organizational structure and context. What is context? Understanding the context, we need to understand both internal and external context of the organization. From internal perspective, what are all the things that we need to consider? We need to consider the culture of the organization. We need to consider the vision, mission, values of the organization. We need to consider the objectives of the organization. All that need to be considered when we trying to do a risk management process, when we prepare the risk management framework. So determining the risk management accountability and oversight roles, who are all need to be done, all should be integral part of the organizational governance. So is it enough you have an organization, if you have a team for implementing risk management? There should be a governance process also need to be set, and whatever risk management process that we do, that also should aid the organization to take appropriate decisions at appropriate time. So they are going to be useful for decision making process also. Integrating risk management into an organization is dynamic and iterative process. As I was telling, that the just you implement one set of controls and leave it there is not risk management. It is one time risk. It is not a one time affair. It has to happen continuously over a period of time in the organization, and any changes that's happening either internally or externally, all that need to be addressed and all to be anticipated, and we need to come out with our uh, solution for those risks. Now, coming back to the next point, it will be on the design part of it. What is design? Design is supposed to understand what is the present controls that we have in place, how we are able to, what are all the resources available, who are all to be implemented, deployed for those activities. All that need to be decided, and a design need to be done in the framework. Understanding the organization and its context, articulating the risk management commitment, it's all to be done by way of preparing the policies and procedures. As you all know that ISO, basically any standard, are depends basically on the policies and procedures, and whatever we document we need to practice, and whatever we practice it should have been there in the document. Okay, so based on that, if you take into account, we need to articulate the risk management commitment both from the management side, from the employee side, and also we need to allocate resources, and also we need to ensure that establishing the communication and consultation. Is it enough that only few people involved in implementing the risk management process? No, each and every one of in the organization need to get themselves involved, and appropriate communication and consultation process need to be there for having an effective and efficient risk management framework. Now, coming back to the next important aspect is implementation. We have prepared the policies, we have prepared everything, we have allocated the resources. If we are not implementing, what will happen? There will not be any change. We will not be able to meet the organizational objectives. So, developing an appropriate plan, including the time and resources, and also identifying where and when and how different types of decisions need to be made. It all will be made based on the changes that happens internally and out externally. Modifying the applicable decision making process, if there is any change happens, do we need to make any change to the existing controls? Do we need to make any change in the way in which we are looking at the process? all that need to be addressed. Now, ensuring that the organization's arrangements for managing risk are clearly, it's not that only one set of people understand the requirement, and each and every one of them who are involved in the risk management process need to be aware of the, clearly understand what is that they need to do and how they need to do, what are all the checkpoints that they have to look at. All that need to be clearly spelled and clearly informed to all the stakeholders, and periodically measure the risk management process. That is the next part, is that it's not enough you prepare the policies and procedures and implement, but are we implementing those implementation controls? Is it providing us the desired result? How we will do? We will be able to come out with the metrics and measurements. They need to be evaluated and they need to be looked at. What is the target that we set and what we have achieved? If we are nearby around 2 to 3% plus or minus, then we are near to the achievement of the objectives and achievement of the targets and things like that. Now, if there is some big gap there, then probably there is something wrong in our framework. So we need to revisit all the policies and procedures and the steps that we need to do to control the risks. All that need to be revisited and need to be updated. That means to say we need to come out with our corrective actions. For coming out the corrective actions, we need to do root cause analysis and other aspects of it, and we need to evaluate them. Once you evaluate and you come out with your corrective action, you also need to come out with your improvement plan. So continually monitor and adapt the risk management framework. Number one, continuously monitor, and we should not leave the risk management framework. We should work with that, but sidely we will have to make changes into the document and process, procedures, everything, and try to improve our process or improve our performance by following the processes. And improvement opportunities needs to be identified, and we need to develop plans and takes and assign them. And also we need to identify, there has to be a separate improvement team. Basically the person who are involved in the implementation and the person who are going to be improved, look at the improvement aspects of it should be different. Then only they will have the different viewpoint, and they will able to provide important information in terms of how to change the structure or how to change the framework and things like that. All that will be given by them. So it is better to have two different teams, one for implementation and one for independent team to audit or analyze and provide inputs to for implementation aspects of it. Yeah. So that is how it will need to be done. Now, coming back to the next important aspect of only these points are there in the framework. Now, all these points are very much important to have an effective and efficient risk management process. Now, these are all principles and framework or guidelines. They are based on that you are going to create your risk management process. See, if you look at it, all these are tightly connected. The principles, framework, and the process, both are tightly coupled, and information should flow from the top management to all levels of the people in order to implement better risk management process. Now, coming back to the next topic, it is on risk management process. What we need to look at is that we need, see, if you look at this diagram, there are set of items which are there in the center, which needs to be implemented, which need to be processed, to be looked at, and they are all connected with monitoring and review, communication and consultation, recording and reporting. All are connected to this main process. What are all the process? The steps that involved in the process are all given here in this diagram. If you look at it, it is talking about scope, context, criteria. If any risk management process that we are planning to implement, we should know what is the scope. The scope will be depend upon the level at which this risk management process is going to be implemented. And also, it's going to look at the context of the organization. When we talk about the context of the organization, it is both internal and external contexts need to be identified and need to be addressed while changing the contents. Now, when we talk about criteria, we generally know about risk acceptance criteria. What are all the risk acceptance criteria? How much amount of risk that we can take? All that needs to be understood, documented, defined, and then we will be able to look at that. Okay. Now, coming back, the 6.1, this is the class 6, which is talking about the risk management process, where we have a systematic application of policies and procedures and practices, and the activities should be communicated and consulted. Basically, communication and consultation is going to play an important role. Without involving all the stakeholders in the risk management process, your risk management process will not be effective, it will not be efficient. So because the people who are working on the ground will able to provide more inputs for improving your risk management process. So try to get inputs from them and then try to come out with your policies and procedures and practices. Now, establishing the context, assessing, treating, monitoring, and reviewing, and recording and reporting the risk. Thus, as I was telling you, that it has communication and consultation is going to be one of the important aspects in your risk management process. And it should be assist the relevant stakeholders in understanding the risk. And also, we people should able to communicate and consult with the team, and basis on which decisions will be made. Basically, any changes that we need to make in the policies and procedures will be made based on the communication and consultation that you have with your team members, and also it will be done. Reasons why particular actions are required need to be addressed. And also, communication should seek from the need to promote awareness. Basically, we are doing risk management process. You just keep it for one or two people, and it is not been communicated to all the people in the organization, then it is no meaning. So it needs to have a proper communication and consultation process to be set. And also, consultation involves obtaining feedback and information to support decision making. All this needs to be taken into account while preparing your communication and consultation process. Now, talking about the scope, context, and criteria involved, basically, we need to come out with the scope of the process, where we are implementing this, whether we are implementing it at the project level or at the department level or at the organization level. The scope varies. Depending upon the scope, the context also varies. So basically, if you look at it, when you are trying to implement a risk management process in an organization, you need to consider the external factors, internal factors to the organization. All that need to be understood, and also the different levels of risks that we need to understand: strategic risks, operational risks, and project level risks, and other activities. Whatever activity that we do, all that need to be addressed to. Understanding the external and internal context is again and again is being addressed in all areas of the, it has been addressed in the principles, it has been addressed in the framework, it is addressing again in the process, because that is the guiding factor for the organization to implement or to design a efficient and effective risk management process, and should specify the amount of type of risk that the organization can take. Basically, no, we have always have the risk acceptance criteria. See, basically, no, the risk acceptance criteria can be done both qualitatively and quantitatively. All high risks needs to be addressed. That is qualitative way of telling. Now, any risk that is having the risk value greater than 50 or other whatever value that we are fixing based on the our design and things like that, that is what we call it as quantitative way of responding, or quantitative way of setting up the criteria. So we need to know what is the scope, we need to know what is the context on which the risk management process is going to work, and also we need to know what are all the risk criteria that we are setting up for the organization or for that risk management process. Now, coming back, the next important aspect is risk assessment. See, what we need to do is risk assessment consists of multiple other items. What is called risk identification, risk analysis, and risk evaluation. Now, what is identification? Risk identification. First and foremost thing that we need to do is that we need to understand that there is some risk exists. So those risks needs to be identified, and the risk can be tangible. It can be tangible sources of risk. We need to understand the causes and events for that. And also we need to identify the threats and opportunities. We need to identify vulnerabilities and the capabilities that we have. Based on that, the risks are to be identified, and changes that's happening in the external and internal context of the organization, and the indicators of what are the possible risks that can come up based on whatever information we are getting from external world. All that need to be considered while identifying the risks. Okay. Now, risk assessment should be conducted systematically, and also we should be doing it iteratively. It's not enough we just do it once and then leave it. We have to do it continuously, and we have to do it iteratively and collaboratively. Collaboratively means involving all the people in the organization. Now, risk analysis, the likelihood of events and consequences, the nature and magnitude of the consequences needs to be looked at, and complexity and the connectivity of the risk analysis needs to be looked at. The effectiveness of the existing controls is one of the important aspects that we need to consider while we performing our risk analysis. Now, next is risk evaluation. As I said, that all risks that you implement, the controls need to be monitored. All those metrics and measurements needs to be evaluated and see that they are meeting the target. And once you identify the risk, then we need to be treated. What are all the possible treating options that we have? It's all avoid, accept, reduce, and transfer. And also, we need to plan and implement risk treatment. We need to assess the effectiveness of the risk treatment. Basically, it is not enough you treat the risk and then leave it. There again, we need to evaluate the effectiveness of the risk treatment, and we need to decide what changes need to be made and things like that. Now, to another point is that as we talked about as part of the principles and framework, we need to continuously monitor and review, and also all these are need to be recorded, and we should refer these records for every review meeting that we have for implementing the risk management process. And based on that recording, whatever we made, based on that we need to come out with our change management process with reference to risk management. Yeah. Now, coming back to the next thing, we just want to give some sample how risk identification and other aspects we need to consider. Now there are different types of risks available, like organizational risks, financial risks, strategic risks, technical risks, and other risks. Now we will be talking about some example on technical risks. Now when we talk about risk management technical risks, we have to identify the categories of items that needs to be evaluated, risk needs to be implemented, and then subcategory we need to identify. If you take for example security, we are taking uh, the thing is that authentication and management system we need to look at. If that is going to be the subcategory, under that what are all the possible risks that you can have? Weak password recovery violation, and that we will be implementing what control we need to implement. For implementing that, we need to implement with strong password policy, like that. So like that we have shared some sample diagram we have put. You can refer this later point in time. uh, that's it from my side. And whatever information that we gave in the seminar and the webinar are all of our understanding and the best practices that we thought it should be followed based on what was given in the ISO standard. And it is our interpretation. This is a disclaimer from our side. That's it from my side. Thank you. You can post your questions in the Q&A box and I will be happy to answer.
Okay, hi guys. Thank you a lot to Mr. Swami. That was a great session. And now I'd like to request everybody to please, post your questions in the Q&A section. And also, if you can see, there's a poll section. There are just 3 questions. So it'll be great if you guys can also participate in the polls. So once we are done with the polls, then we'll move on and start answering the Q&A. So please, there are 3 questions. Just please give your inputs in the poll. And then once you guys are done, we'll move on to the Q&A.
One of the questions that they are asking is that how risk management for cloud security and other organizations process risk management are different. Basically, as I was telling that in a risk management process, we need to identify our scope and context and criteria. Basically, when we talk about scope, when it is going to be other projects related risks, it will be the scope will be related to the project. And if it is going to be cloud, then again we need to consider what are all the factors that we need to take into account. Like, when we are doing the thing in cloud, we need to ensure that we are taking care of the network security, we're taking care of the application security, other things. All those aspects needs to be considered while we preparing the risk management for cloud environment. And we should be aware what are all the controls that cloud service providers are implemented, which can be used to mitigate the possible risk that we may get. All that. Okay. So these are all the important aspects that we need to consider. Basically, when we trying to do it for other aspects of the risk, it will be we need to consider related to that particular area. What are all the possible risks that can come and things like that, and we need to build our risk management process around that. Hope this answer your query. What are all the most important assets with respect to information security? See, we need to consider all information assets, information processing facilities that we use, and also all critical assets. All need to be considered. Basically, some of the assets which may not have be there as a backup and things like that, that may not come in. But again, we need to have abundant, redundancy in terms of having the assets and other aspects. If you are hosting an application into a cloud environment, then we need to ensure the platform is going to meet our application requirements and things like that. All those assets which are there, all that need to be considered for coming out with your information security requirements.
Okay, guys, a lot of you have still not done the polls. So just urging again, like, if you guys can please complete the polls. And also, if you have any new questions, please post it in the Q&A. And then Mr. Swami can address those. Otherwise, then we'll close the session. So we'll wait for 5 more minutes. Kindly do the polls. And also, if you have any questions, post it in the Q&A session. And we'll be addressing those.
Yeah. So when we talk about difference between threat, vulnerability, and risks, how risks happens? Risk happens because of a threat and because of vulnerabilities. What is threat? For a typical example, let us take in a system, antivirus. If you do not have an antivirus in the system, your system is going to get affected by virus. That is a threat. There is a weakness in the system that this antivirus can affect your system. What is the weakness? That not having the antivirus software installed in your system is the weakness. So the risk is system getting affected. That in turn is going to affect all our customers also if it is in the network and if it is getting spread in the network. So that is why what we will do generally, we will try to remove the system which is affected by virus from the network, fix the antivirus updates, and then reconnect to the network. So this is how this been differentiated. So threat is the possibility of risk happening or event happening, and vulnerability is a weakness in the system, and risk is the result of both. This answers your query. What is risk treatment? Basically, when we talk about risk treatment, whatever risk that we identified, we need to mitigate them. So when we mitigate, we need to possibly, the impact and consequences, the impact and the likelihood, we need to understand, identify. Either we have to reduce the impact or we have to reduce the likelihood of happening. Any one is possible, right? That is what is called risk treatment. When you try to do that, we need to implement control. Control can be a policy, it can be a process, it can be anything, any device or anything, whatever. You are identifying the right item. See, basically the treatment consists of four. What is called avoid, accept, mitigate, and transfer. Basically, a risk is happening that when you travel, you are going to get accident. For that, you are taking an accident insurance. Taking insurance is that transferring the risk, correct? The other thing is that avoid. What is the avoid? How are you going to avoid? We are going to remove the threat, or we are going to remove the vulnerability. We are going to remove the source. From the source, we are going to remove that, so that we are going to ensure that we are not getting into that business at all. Basically, avoiding that. Number 3 is accept. We know that there is some risk. We accept that risk by putting some controls, and we accept the balanced risk, that is residual risk. Okay, this is how it has been. This is what I could able to explain on treatment, risk treatment. Policy. Is it the risk?
So we also have a question on who is a risk owner.
Who is the risk owner? Risk owner is a person who is involved in the particular activity. Basically, no, if you take into account developer, he is a person who is responsible for ensuring giving a correct code. And what are the possible risks that can come in that, he only knows. So he should be the owner, and he should be able to come out with the risk mitigation options of ensuring that the codes are written with secured coding practices are followed, things like that. That needs to be directed by their team members, by the team leader. Basically, the owner is the person who owns the asset. He is going to be the risk owner, because who is owning the asset only will know what type of risk that is there and things like that. They are the people who is going to be the risk owner, and the person who is going to approve the risk will be above from his level, the next level, in the top management level. Password option policy. Is it the risk even if the data category is medium? If an organization don't have a password rotation, see, is it a risk even if the data category is medium? See, without having a password rotation policy, you will not have a robust password management activity. So it is important. Password rotation is required, and this cannot be treated as medium. It should be treated as high only. And we need to come out with a strong password policy for this, which will be given as having more than minimum number of characters, and rotating the policy, rotating the password for every 90 days or like that. All those policies need to be implemented for mitigating this risk. What is the risk management effectiveness? This is the last question we are going to take. Risk management effectiveness. Primarily, as I was telling, that for all activities that we do, there has to be a metrics and measurements identified. Whatever metrics that we identified are addressed and we are able to achieve the target of that metrics and measurements, then we are able to ensure that the risk management process is effective. If they are not, see, effectiveness is primarily what we define. If I'm going to see that there is no risk available in the environment, that is not the right approach. These risks are going to be there. The effectiveness of the risk management depends on the risk treatment that we do, the risk analysis that we do, the risk monitoring that we do. Basically, no, it is not enough you implement the risk treatment plan and then leave it. We have to continuously monitoring that the risk treatment that we are doing is going to meet the organization requirements, and it's going to meet the organizational objectives. So by doing that only, we are going to ensure risk management effectiveness. That's it. Thanks a lot, guys.
Okay, so I
Aruna.
think, yeah, that's a wrap for us.
Yeah.
And once again, thanks everybody for joining today's session. And I hope you guys have learned something. And for everybody who would like to refer to this session again, we'll be posting a recording of a recording of this on our YouTube channel. So you can always go back and refer, and you guys will also be getting a recording of this session. So yeah, that's it. Stay tuned for our upcoming webinar, and that's it. Thanks a lot. Bye, guys.
You guys.